My name is Elena. I'm 30 years old, and I used to believe that blood was thicker than water until my own parents dragged me into a courtroom to take every cent I had earned. The scent of fresh cedar and white paint was better than any perfume. I ran my hand over the kitchen island, feeling the cool, smooth grain of the marble. My fingernails were still stained with a faint line of grit from sanding the baseboards until midnight. But for the first time in 5 years, the house didn't smell like mold and neglect. It smelled like mine. I had spent every weekend and every spare cent of my architectural draftswoman salary on this bungalow. I'd lived on ramen and lukewarm coffee, sleeping on a mattress on the floor while I stripped wallpaper and rewired outlets. "It's cozy," my mother Martha said, her voice dropping like a lead weight in the middle of the room. She didn't look at the craftsmanship of the crown molding. She was staring at the stainless steel refrigerator. "Must have cost a fortune. I didn't realize your little drawing job paid so well, Elena." My father, Arthur, didn't even say hello. He walked straight to the window, squinting at the backyard. "The lot size is decent. You could fit an ADU back there, rent it out for $2,000 a month, easily." "I'm not looking for a tenant, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice light as I poured them wine, the good stuff I'd saved for tonight. "I'm looking for a home. I finally have one." Arthur turned around, his eyes narrow and calculating. He adjusted his silk tie, which looked far too expensive for a man who had claimed he couldn't afford to fix his own leaking roof last month. "A home is an asset, Elena, and assets should be managed. We poured a lot into you so you could get to this point. I hope you haven't forgotten that." The wine tasted like ash in my mouth. I saw them exchanging a look, that sharp, silent communication they'd used my whole life. It wasn't a look of pride, it was the look of two hunters measuring the weight of a kill. "We're so proud of what we've accomplished here," Martha said, a thin, sharp smile stretching her face. I felt a sudden icy shiver. I had swung the hammer, I had bled for this house, but as they looked around my living room, I realized they weren't seeing my success, they were seeing their next payday. The knock on my door at 7:30 a.m. was rhythmic and aggressive. I was still in my bathrobe, clutching a mug of coffee and staring at a floor plan for a new library project. When I opened the door, a man in a rumpled suit handed me a thick manila envelope. "Elena Sterling?" he asked. I nodded, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. "You've been served." He didn't wait for a thank you. He vanished down the porch steps I had hand-stained just last month. I stood there, the morning air chilling the back of my neck, and tore the envelope open. My eyes blurred as I tried to process the legal jargon: constructive trust, equity interest, back pay for parental investment. My parents were suing me. They weren't just asking for a loan. They were claiming that my house, my sanctuary, belonged to them. I collapsed onto the sofa. The document alleged that because they had raised me, provided business consultation during my childhood, and invested in my education, they were entitled to 50% of the market value of my home. It even listed a debt of $150,000 for lifetime expenses. I called my father, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. He picked up on the second ring. "Dad, what is this? Is this a joke?" "Business is never a joke, Elena." Arthur's voice was smooth, devoid of any fatherly warmth. "We gave you the foundation. We provided the environment that allowed you to become a draftswoman. Now that we're looking at our retirement and seeing a shortfall, it's time for that investment to pay out. You have plenty of equity. We just want our fair share." "Your fair share? I paid for this house. I worked double shifts for 3 years." I was shouting now, tears stinging my eyes. "Don't get emotional," he said coldly. "Check the attachments. You signed those IOUs when you were a teenager. You agreed to pay us back for your upkeep. We'll see you in court, Elena. I suggest you get a lawyer. A cheap one." He hung up. I looked at the kitchen island, the marble I'd been so proud of. Suddenly, it looked like a tombstone. The following month was a blur of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale office coffee. My lawyer, a weary man named Marcus, flipped through the IOUs my father had submitted. They were yellowed scraps of notebook paper from when I was 16. Rent, $400. Groceries, $200. Gas for school, $50. My teenage handwriting sat right next to my father's bold, demanding signature. "I thought it was a game," I whispered, leaning over Marcus's desk. "He told me it was to teach me the value of $1. I didn't think he was keeping them in a safe for 15 years to use as weapons." "The problem isn't just the papers, Elena," Marcus said, rubbing his temples. "It's the narrative. They're painting you as a cold, successful professional who used her struggling parents to get ahead and then threw them away. In a family court, emotion can sometimes weigh as much as evidence." I stopped going to the housewarming parties of my friends. I stopped posting on social media. Every time I walked into my kitchen, I felt like a squatter in my own life. I'd catch myself staring at the walls, wondering if my father had actually calculated the cost of the drywall I'd installed. I tried to reach out to my mother one last time, hoping for a shred of maternal instinct. I met her at a park, away from the lawyers. Martha sat on the bench, wearing an old, frayed cardigan I hadn't seen in years. She looked frail, almost too frail. "Mom, please," I begged. "You know this isn't right. I worked for this. Why are you doing this to me?" Martha wouldn't look at me. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Your father says we're owed, Elena. We spent our best years on you. Now we have nothing, and you have all that. It's only fair to spread the wealth." The coldness in her voice was worse than the anger in my father's. It was a calculated, quiet greed. She wasn't my mother anymore. She was a creditor. I realized then that there was no family left to save. There was only the house, the law, and the mounting, crushing weight of their betrayal. And the day of the hearing arrived with a sky the color of wet concrete. Walking into the courthouse, the air felt thick and pressurized, smelling of floor wax and old paper. I smoothed down my navy blue blazer, my palms damp. I saw them across the hallway. Arthur was dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, looking every bit the successful patriarch. But as soon as we entered the courtroom, his posture changed. He slumped his shoulders. Martha, beside him, had traded her floral blouses for a drab, oversized sweater that made her look small and pitiable. It was a performance, and they were playing to the gallery. The room was half full. My parents had invited distant relatives and old family friends, people I hadn't seen in years. I could hear their whispers like the buzzing of wasps. How could she do that to them? She's living in a mansion while they can't even afford their meds. Money changes people, I guess. Every word felt like a physical blow. I sat at the defense table, staring straight ahead at the mahogany bench. My lawyer, Marcus, leaned in. "Keep your face neutral, Elena. Don't give them the reaction they want." The bailiff called us to order, and Judge Sterling entered. He was a man who looked like he was carved from granite, sharp features, silver hair, and eyes that seemed to scan the room for lies before he even sat down. "Case 402, Sterling versus Sterling," the bailiff announced. My father's lawyer stood up. He didn't start with facts, he started with a story. He talked about sacrificial love and a daughter who climbed a ladder her parents built, only to kick it away once she reached the top. He pointed at me, calling me a trustee of her parents' dreams who had breached that trust. I looked at Arthur. He squeezed out a single, calculated tear and dabbed it away with a silk handkerchief. I felt a surge of nausea. They weren't just trying to take my house, they were trying to erase my character in front of everyone I had ever known. The afternoon sun bled through the high arched windows of the courtroom, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. Arthur took the stand first. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane I knew for a fact he didn't need. "We just wanted her to have the best," Arthur said, his voice cracking with practiced precision. "That $10,000 we gave her for the down payment, that wasn't a gift, it was our life savings. We told her, 'Elena, this is an investment in our collective future.' She looked me in the eye and promised we'd always have a place there." His lawyer held up a document, the $10,000 check. "And this loan was never repaid, was it?" "Not a cent," Arthur sighed. "And when she finished the house, she told us we weren't welcome. She said the guest suite was for her branding or something. It broke Martha's heart." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. He was lying. He was lying under oath in a room full of people, with a Bible just inches from his hand. Then came the evidence. They produced a photo of me at 18, signing the chore chart they were now calling a debt contract. They produced my bank statements from the last 3 years, highlighting every luxury purchase, a new laptop for work, a pair of decent work boots, as proof that I was squandering the money I owed them. My own lawyer, Marcus, tried to cross-examine, but Arthur was slippery. Every time Marcus pointed out a logical flaw, Arthur would pivot back to his failing health or how much it cost to raise a child in the 90s. The gallery was hooked. I saw my Aunt Sarah shaking her head at me from the 3rd row. Even the court reporter seemed to be looking at me with a cold, professional pity. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of ink and false memories. My parents had spent my entire life building a cage, and now they were finally ready to lock the door. The tension in the room was a physical weight, pressing the air out of my lungs. After Arthur stepped down, Martha took the stand. She was even more devastating. She spoke in a whisper, forcing the judge to lean forward to hear her tales of sacrificed dental work and skipped vacations, all to ensure I had a college fund. By the time she was finished, the room felt like a funeral for my reputation. My lawyer, Marcus, looked at me and shook his head slightly. "Elena, their narrative is consistent. Without a smoking gun, the judge might actually grant them an equity stake just to balance the scales of family fairness. It happens more often than you'd think." I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a worker, calloused and steady, but they were shaking now. I felt small. I felt like that 16-year-old girl again, being told I owed my parents for the very air I breathed. The judge, however, hadn't said a word for 20 minutes. Judge Sterling sat perfectly still, his chin resting on his interlaced fingers. His eyes weren't on the weeping Martha or the indignant Arthur. He was staring at the stack of financial disclosures Arthur had submitted to prove his poverty. He flipped a page, then another. The sound of the paper hitting the desk was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a sudden, sharp edge that made my father sit up straighter in the gallery. "Please return to the stand. I have a clarification regarding Exhibit D, the $10,000 check you provided for your daughter's closing costs." My father stood up, smoothing his suit jacket, a look of smug confidence on his face.
He thought he'd won. He thought the judge was about to congratulate him on his investment. "Certainly, Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice oily and confident. It was the cornerstone of her home. Without my capital, she would still be renting. The judge didn't smile. He leaned over the bench, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from a drama to an interrogation.
The silence in the room was absolute. Even the whispers in the gallery died away as Judge Sterling pulled a single sheet of paper from the thick stack of mortgage documents. He held it between two fingers, like it was contaminated. "Mr. Sterling," the judge began, his voice dropping an octave into a cold, dangerous calm, "you have testified under oath today, repeatedly, that this $10,000 was a business loan. You claimed it was an investment that granted you a legal stake in your daughter's property. Is that correct?" Arthur puffed out his chest, glancing back at the gallery to make sure his supporters were watching his triumph. "That is correct, Your Honor. It was never a gift. I expect to be repaid with the equity I am owed." The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Then I have one question for you. I have here the mandatory gift letter you signed and submitted to your daughter's mortgage lender 5 years ago. In this document, you stated, and I quote, 'I certify that this is a bona fide gift and that there is no obligation, expressed or implied, to repay this sum at any time.'" The judge paused, the words hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. "So, Mr. Sterling," the judge continued, his voice cracking like a whip, "which is it? Did you lie to the federal mortgage lenders 5 years ago to help your daughter secure a loan? Or are you lying to me in my courtroom right now?" The color drained from my father's face so fast I thought he might faint. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. Beside him, Martha's fragile posture vanished as she stiffened in terror. The gallery, once buzzing with sympathy for my parents, was now deathly still. The one question had done what months of arguing couldn't. It had exposed the foundation of their case as a house of cards. If he admitted it was a loan, he was admitting to mortgage fraud, a federal crime. If he admitted it was a gift, his entire lawsuit was dead. My father's silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. For a full minute, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the back wall and the frantic scratching of the court reporter's pen. Arthur looked at his lawyer, but the man had already closed his briefcase. There was no defense for a signed confession. I might have misremembered the terminology," Arthur finally stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "Misremembered?" Judge Sterling's gavel hit the desk with a deafening crack. "You didn't misremember. You attempted to use this court as a tool for extortion. You signed a federal document declaring this a gift, and now you stand here trying to double dip into your daughter's hard-earned equity. Not only is this lawsuit dismissed with prejudice, but I am also referring this matter to the district attorney's office for an investigation into attempted mortgage fraud and perjury." Martha let out a sharp, choked sob, but this time nobody in the gallery leaned in to comfort her. The struggling parents were gone. In their place were two people who had been caught trying to rob their own child. As the room cleared, I stayed in my seat. I felt light, almost hollow. Marcus squeezed my shoulder. "It's over, Elena. The house is yours. They can never touch it again." I walked out of the courthouse into the cool afternoon air. My parents were waiting by the stone pillars. Arthur looked older now, his expensive suit rumpled, his pride stripped away. "Elena, wait," Martha said, reaching out with a trembling hand. "We were just worried about our future. You have to understand, we're your parents. You can't let them prosecute us. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Talk to the judge." I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in years. I didn't see the giants who had raised me. I saw two people so consumed by their own greed that they were willing to destroy my life to fund their lifestyle. I didn't sue you, I said, my voice steady and quiet. You sued me. You chose this path, and now you have to walk it. You're going to let your own father go to jail? Arthur hissed, the mask of the victim finally slipping to reveal the rage beneath. No, Dad. I'm going home, to my home. Don't call me again. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I thought about the cedar wood and the white paint, and how for the first time, my house wouldn't just be a building, it would be a fortress.